We need more of this in boxing. We need more Bilal Fawaz in boxing. And for most people in the US, they probably have no idea who Bilal Fawaz is. But for most of my channel and the subscribers, and if you are one of the people who know Bilal Fawaz is, be sure to hit the subscribe button right now and, leave a comment and all that type of stuff. We've been listening, and I look unhinged right now. Bilal Fawaz got a draw with a prospect last year, then goes on to beat the prospect. The prospect was Junaid Boston in the UK, back-to-back fights. And now at 37 years old, he's beaten Ishmael Davis, who some might scoff at, but gave Josh Kelly a tough fight. And he gave the fighter, who I can't pronounce his name, but is fighting Brandon Adams in an eliminator in the junior middleweight division, a really hard fight. So Ishmael Davis is one of these guys who always gives fighters an honest fight, and if you're not a certain tier of fighter, you just simply won't beat him. And what impressed me about Fawaz was the way he finished the fight. There was some flavor, there was some pizzazz, there was a showmanship to him, and he finished strong in the fight. Now, why is it such a compelling story? Well, a 37-year-old fighter that was taking B-side fights, who was not really seen as one of the top guys in the division, going on to become one of the more interesting figures in 2026. That's a story. That's a fascinating story. And now he's emerged out of this British kind of regional level card that I'll get into in a second as one of the fringe, more fascinating figures in British boxing, at least to me, because it still doesn't feel like he'll be the best guy of an era. It doesn't feel like he'll be a top maybe 5 guy. But do we have a chance to see someone who's an underdog at the late stages of their career challenge for a belt? Could he even win a belt? It's an interesting proposition, and now he's beating guys who one would assume, knowing what they know about boxing, whether it's the politics, age, and everything, that he shouldn't win these fights. But yet he's defying the odds, and that is fascinating. So the story of Bilal Fawaz, to me, in the UK was the most fascinating story. Now, for most people, British fight fans, I think the story was a tribute to Lee Wood and Josh Warrington. Warrington and Wood have provided some of the most exciting British fights of really probably the last 7-8 years. Both, I would say, are limited to a certain degree, and both rely upon a lot of heart and merit to get the job done. What is merit, by the way? That's just a grandiose word. I'd say just toughness and durability, and they kind of play to the tropes that I think British fight fans really enjoy. The common man, the everyman, the fighting man, the person that's modest and humble and just comes to fight and put on a show. Warrington at his best was a high volume, high punch output guy who could overwhelm you. And Lee Wood at his best was a fighter who could never be counted out because he could rally back at any moment. And he had these kind of heroic comeback moments that make you jump out of your seat and spill your popcorn all over the chair. At this point, neither is the same guy. Lee Wood won the fight, but he won the fight mostly, in my opinion, because he has more left than Warrington. Warrington doesn't have the same attributes that made him an elite world-class fighter and got him to the belts and all that stuff. And he really hasn't shown that same trajectory, one could say, since the Lara fight, but really since Venado Lopez beat him. After the Venado Lopez fight, he has been a different guy. He's now lost a lot of his fights in recent memory, and it probably should be the end of the road for Lee Wood. Who knows? But I just don't also see him in that upper echelon. That being said, it's okay to have really exciting fights in regional markets that maybe don't matter for world championships. They just matter to the audience itself. And I think that's what this was. This was more of a tribute to two fighters who've given a lot to British boxing and have really probably ushered in more fans than we understand because of the action they provided and created a gateway for new fans into the sport that we'll see later on, where people show spiritual inspiration from Wood or Warrington. Other notables from the undercard: Sandy Ryan wins a belt, looks a bit flawed, like someone said in my comment section. It was not the dominant performance I think we were hoping for. One has to wonder where her career is going because there's just not progression currently. It looks like when she's getting into tough fights, it's just turning into a fight. and there's not as much strategy being put into it. Who knows what it is? It could be you get hit, I want to give one and take one. But really, since the Michaela Mayer fight, she's kind of stuck at a certain pattern. And really, in that second fight, she didn't have the same tools she had in the first fight. So I'm curious where her career is going, because it was an odd performance, and it's also odd when you're fighting in a vacant title belt against someone who has kind of a 500 record, which, shows kind of how at times there is a lack of depth in women's boxing. But, this is a majority decision. I'm sure her challenger was a game opponent, but it felt like there should be a level of separation given the accolades that Sandy Ryan had in her career. Taya Mae Ayton, a young up-and-coming hopeful star fighter, had her first kind of challenging bout of her career. And I think that also shows that young fighters need hard fights at a certain point. It's fine. She's entering that developmental phase where she wins a fight. It's a close fight. There's a lot of excitement around her career, but, you have to develop fighters in a manner in which they get all the different looks. And sometimes having a hard fight actually does more for a fighter than just, a lot of knockout wins. And it seems like now she's hitting that phase of her career where she's going to take on the stern tests to get her ready for championship tests. Those are kind of the notable fights that stood out to me on this card. Be sure to watch the podcast to get more of my opinions.